everyone, my name is Moon and welcome back to week 4 of our year-long A Build a Day challenge. For anyone new to this challenge, the basic idea is that I create at least one build per day for a full 365 or 366 duration. Due to structures being our main focus last week, we're back to organics to mix it up. With all that said and done, let's get into day 22. For this week, I decided to attach a mythological theme to it. Given this, it became obvious that I had to start off building a dragon. I went into it super enthusiastically as I have such a strong passion for dragons. However, after many attempts, I just could not get it to work how I wanted. I related this more or less to stress and had to actively remember to take it slow on the next day. The build I imagined was a fire dragon wrapped around a pole. The tail twist worked out okay, but by the time I got to the dragon body at the top, I felt it all melded into one blob. I just could not get the definition of the muscles right. Other than my struggles, the process for this one involved making a mini sketch build, which then later was used as a base point of reference for the larger version. After struggling to define the muscles how I wanted with ongoing artist block, I ended up giving up for that day and just made a cute dragon flower scene out of the smaller sketch build. I complemented this with some larger grass clumps surrounding the sides and a light sloping terrain. Day 23 pulled inspiration from Chinese and Japanese folklore. The kitsune is classified as a fox spirit and ranges from 5, 7 or 9 tails. For this build in particular, I chose to build 7. The process roughly followed the same as our Minecraft fox from week 2. The base pose was sketched out in lapis, which I then bulked up for the muscle structure. And more often than not, I find I have to move heads up in this process as the necks just feel too short. In order to prevent palette conflicts with my previous fox, I chose to make this one white, with the darkest areas being a shade of grey. Once again, stained glass was used to accentuate the fur. To complete the scene, I built a tree without leaves that flowed its way up and over the fox. For day 24, I became inspired by a comment from Mitten82 on one of my previous Twitter posts suggesting I make a kelpie. This mythological creature can be referred to as a form of seahorse hybrid, but also loosely resembles the hippocampus creature. To start off, I began making out the initial spine or baseline. This helps me visualize the flow of the body in water. Once that is down, I once again bulk up the body. During this initial process, I don't focus on the overall refined shape, but rather place blocks in a rough manner without thinking too much about it. While building, I usually have my alternate account as an external perspective on a secondary monitor, thus saving time by not having to fly in and out all the time. Make sure you continuously get an overall perspective while building. For the oceanic fantasy nature of the creature, I really wanted to exaggerate the fins. This involved long, curvy, and block-thin lines that followed the shape of the body. Usually, for things like this, I don't think about the shape too much and just spam blocks in the general direction that I'm flying in and hope for the best. Once I've got my rough sketch, as I like to call it, I then look back from afar and make any necessary changes with refinements to top it off. I then go over it with more layers of blocks flowing out from the central point of each fin to give it some volume. Kind of like if you were building hair strands. Palette-wise, this one of course is inspired by the ocean and thus ended up blue, all the while adding a green tinge for body separation. This can almost be related to like seaweed or something. Prismarine works as a nice gradient block as well to add between the blue and green hues. For the little hooves on his front, I added a white to grey gradient to make them a bit more prominent from the body. It also added a bit of that fantasy feel, as well as allowing the white used in the eyebrows to be seen somewhere else in the build. If I add a certain colour to something I make, I like to add it in other places so it feels like it belongs and doesn't get trapped, so to say, in one location. Other than the kelpie for this week, which was probably my favourite to make, the wendigo for day 25 was a close second. I feel like the shading and his positioning just came out fairly well in the end. There's a few different renditions of what people believe the creature to look like, so I based it off some common qualities, such as the lanky body, long fingers, skull mask, and hair tuft on the chest. To start the building process of this one, I began with the base leg positions and worked my way up the spine. Now, the wendigo is typically very skinny with very thin yet muscle-like legs, no waistline and a big rib cage underneath the stretched skin. Due to this, I didn't have to do much to the waist and added quite a bit of volume to the chest to really accentuate the overall shape of the ribcage underneath. This was later increased even more with layers of hair or fluff over the top. Adding an angle to the head as well as pulling the arms to bend backwards further contributes to his overall stance. He's looking up while supporting his balance with separated legs and asymmetrical arm positions. Avoiding the symmetrical look gives the build more character and feels like he's mid-motion, rather than a static statue. Adding a long, sweeping tail around the body also helped this ideal notion. Throughout this, I also adjusted limb length multiple times when they felt slightly too short in relation to the body itself. Proportions in organics are one of the hardest things you may face while creating these large builds, and also make a massive difference when correct or incorrect. If you feel something is off, find out why. And remember, if you have to try again, that's okay. These things take time. Once the base shapes were locked in, I moved on to painting the general colours I wanted the wendigo to be, the skull being white and the body overall being a very dark shade of brown. Prior to actually texturing this form, I decided to add in the terrain, so I knew what vibe and exact position I wanted to work with. In the end, I decided that the leg posing felt too static and moved one leg to be perched up on a rock, as if he's just gotten hungry and sniffing the air for prey or something. I ended up super happy with this decision, and he actually ended up being one of my favourites for the week with his end result. To really complete the piece for this one, I finalised it by adding spikes to his back, extra floof, terrain colouring, and one of my favourite bits, the end body texturing. I love making it pop with gradients. Day 26 was probably one of the biggest I've done in the challenge, yet certainly not my favourite. I somehow thought it was a good idea to make something of a human form, a fairy. I was like, yes, this is mythological, let's do it. And later I find to soon regret that. Human forms are probably one of the most challenging things to make in organics. Our muscle structure is very intricate, and if the proportions aren't correct, it's just not going to look right to our human eye. You'd think we would have this down by memory by now, but I think that's what makes it so much harder to do. We know what to pick out when something feels wrong because we're so used to subconsciously knowing proportions. Regardless, for this one, I started out as usual and chucked down some blue blobs in a very rough form. While building, I used the sketching technique, which is basically just me spamming blocks in the general areas I feel should have some volume. I don't think too much about it, and I let my initial gut feeling take over. I later go over these and refine the shape to be smooth and coherent, as well as adjusting any proportion issues as I go. The legs became too long, the chest was too high, and the waist just didn't have enough muscle volume. All of these had to be adjusted multiple times before I was somewhat okay with the result. Even in the end, it could do with so much more adjustment, but by that point, my motivation for this one was just wearing thin. Due to how large and time-consuming this organic became, I ended up actually stretching it over 2 days, somewhat similar to how I ended up doing the traditional home from Thailand, yet in a much less progressed state. At the end of day 26, I ended up sketching out some fantasy split wings that I think matched her well and left it at that. When 27 rolled around, I took one look at her and decided I really needed to plan out where this was heading. I took a screenshot, pulled out my Surface Pro with Photoshop and went to town. I made a very rough paint over in order to help my brain visualize the direction I intended to go in and figure out what I could fix. One of the first things I changed was the leg that stretched back. The bend was weird and didn't really fit her posture, so I straightened it out. After that, I attempted to figure out a nice floral colour scheme with gorgeous dark skin and short brown hair. I felt like each item I added served to contrast one another, but aimed to work in unison. Back into Minecraft, I started laying it out with all blocks as usual, which later transitioned to the lovely yellow, green, purple and white palette. These were 2 pieces of her clothing in this case. You had the purple undergarment like you would imagine a one-piece bikini with white floral decorations, and then the green and yellow drape that resembled leaves of a flower. I further carried this feel into her hair by adding a small flower crown. Now, the wings in my paint over were quite a lot brighter, but upon trying out such a colour in Minecraft, I decided against it and went for a more pale look. settling on a general birch and sandstone feel. I think it works nicely as a supporting role without stealing too much of the attention. To complete the piece, I utilised some of my assets from previous builds and pasted them around on the ground plate, as well as creating a new custom large leaf plant for this environment to match the scale. I felt somewhat okay with how it came out in the end, but it could definitely be improved. Each day is a learning experience and I'll tackle it differently next time. The final day of week 4 initially had me excited. I had this vision in my mind to make my own version of a Hellhound. The problem is that I underestimated how much space and detail I'd really have to add to it. It turned out okay in the end, but I think I definitely have to recreate this again in a typical Pearl scale fashion in the future. Nothing like a bit of good old third person chat for you guys. Regardless, for this one, his pose in mind was as if the Hellhound was jumping in the air and coming down to land. In the end, I decided it wasn't working how I envisioned and transitioned it to him running down some rocks in a lava-hot wasteland. Due to how odd the position I originally envisioned was, it was quite hard to find a real-life reference image of a dog in this artistic pose, so I had to make a lot of guesses as to what made sense. My knowledge in dog anatomy isn't super extensive, so I didn't exactly nail it, but it came out alright in the end after adjusting it to the ground vision. Looking back, I kind of think that he could almost pass off as the Wendigo's pet dog. That skull face just matches so well with that build. Regardless, that particular skull took me a few tries to get the shape somewhat satisfying. This is where the scale issue came to play. Getting the right form I wanted in this size was proving interesting and difficult to figure out, and I still feel like it seems slightly too big, but it kind of developed a style of its own, I suppose. The long, slender bone tail of this creature contributed to the pose. It acted a bit like what we would refer to as a follow-through in animation terms, or so I recall from my university studies. This is where the tail is basically shadowing where the Hellhound once was, where you can also get an idea of the motion at which he is running. It really helped create that movement in the build that I like adding where I can in organics. Once I fiddled with all the posing and felt happy enough with it, I moved on to detailing. This involved adding fur to his back, bones along his spine and ribs, and adding some texturing to his body. The palette consisted of a dark brown for his body and some contrasting reds and oranges for the details. I felt like the magma block added to the whole Hellhound vibe we wanted. However, after this recording, I also added some jack-o'-lanterns for brighter orange lighting along his body. The last piece to pull together for this one was the terrain. During this process, I felt that the Hellhound looked better rotated 90 degrees anti-clockwise, so you could see more of the pose in the initial view. Based on this, I added rocks for him to climb down and a lava stream that ran through the terrain, just to make the world burn. I eventually changed this to more organised lava pools in the same direction just to neaten it up a bit while I was taking screenshots. Due to the few changes I made while off camera, here is the finished piece for day 28 at nighttime. I think the illumination looks pretty cool. And once again, that's it for week 4 of my Minecraft A Build a Day challenge. The next few weeks are based on structures, so I'm quite excited to share that with you guys. If you'd like to see these builds ahead of time before they go live, I'm posting them daily on my Instagram and Twitter that I'll chuck in the description of this video. If you have any feedback on these types of builds and videos, please let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment you guys put down. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!